Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our event, an analysis of AUKUS Pillar II with a focus on land systems and the land capability, hosted by Nova Systems. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve. I am the Senior Analyst at Defence Connect, and if you have any issue with the amount of words that I write, please forward all complaints to my colleague Liam Garman. I'll be your facilitator today, alongside our esteemed panel that I will introduce shortly. Before that, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I'd also extend my respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people in attendance today. I think it goes without saying that AUKUS has fundamentally changed the Australian defence industry landscape. While Pillar 1 and the scale of it, particularly the nuclear-powered submarine, dominates the discussion, Pillar 2 will forge new industrial ties, co-producing and co-delivering a suite of next-generation warfighting capabilities across 8 advanced technology areas. It presents a significant opportunity for Australian companies, but it's not without its challenges. So today's panel will analyse AUKUS Pillar 2 with a focus on land, where we are now, what the specific opportunities are for Australian defence industry, and what needs to occur from industry's point to capitalise on them. In April this year, the 3 AUKUS Army chiefs signed a statement of intent on areas of cooperation. Land is a significant part of Pillar 2, and the DSR heralded a clear shift in the direction of Army. The changing nature is dominated by changing technology accelerating at an advanced pace. When we think of Pillar 2 in relation to land, this includes capabilities such as long-range strike, littoral manoeuvre, autonomous and uncrewed systems. Defence and security is a whole-of-nation endeavour, and we need that more closely than ever before and to be more closely tied and integrated with our allies and partners. How do we adapt at speed that is relevant? So with that context and that background, I will introduce our panellists. The first of our guests is the CEO of Nova Systems, Dean Rosenfield. Dean, thank you very much for joining us today. Dean is a highly experienced and respected business leader with over 20 years of experience in the defence industry. Prior to joining Nova, Dean was the Senior Vice President of Saab AB, responsible for leading the global business development and sales function, and Group Managing Director of Saab UK, responsible for leading the UK business operating in the defence, public safety and underwater robotics areas. He spent 15 years in the Australian Army, holds a Master's in Management from the University of New South Wales, and is a member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Our second guest is the head of the Australian Strategic Capabilities Accelerator, Professor Emily Hilder. Professor Hilder is leading the establishment of a new Defence Innovation Acceleration entity and ecosystem. ASCA will accelerate the development and transition into service of disruptive solutions to priority defence challenges at a pace and scale required to deliver a decisive advantage to our military. Professor Hilder joined Defence in November of 2022 as the Chief Maritime within Defence Science and Technology Group, and holding the role of Chief Platforms from July 2022 to May 2023. And our third and final guest is the Chief Executive Officer of Acacia Systems, Bob Humphreys. Bob has a successful career in defence and technology sectors, both locally and internationally, with a track record of delivering exceptional program management, business development, commercial and strategic customer relationship management. Bob has a career spanning the Royal Australian Navy, joining in 1984, and completed a Bachelor of Engineering, Electrical Engineering, with his Navy career including various operational support and program management roles, before retiring in January of 2005 to begin a career in private business. Bob's final role in uniform, however, was in Washington, D.C. to lead the joint US Navy and ran a cooperative development program for the R&D and productization of next-generation submarine heavyweight torpedoes, establishing a successful program that begins that continues to this day, rather. So with that in mind, I will dive into the first of our questions. First of all, thank you very much for joining us today. In an interview last month, Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles had this to say on AUKUS. AUKUS is new. People are coming to terms with it. Anything that's new, people have anxiety. But actually what we need, the more we talk to people about it and the more that we explain what it is and how it will work, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, that it affords a much greater opportunity for work in Australia than the opposite. He went on to say that AUKUS in the Australian defence industry context is going to really drive the biggest uplift in the Australian defence industry that we've seen. And I think we are getting that message across to local companies. So is that message getting across? Fundamentally, is there enough understanding of how it's going to work and what Australia will be able to contribute in AUKUS Pillar 2? That's a question for Dean and Bob, and then it's probably a good one for you as well, Professor Hilder.
Or maybe if I kick off there, I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity. I mean, there's been a lot of talk around AUKUS, and in particular now Pillar 2, because everyone knows what's happening in Pillar 1. But I think one area we've got to look at there is trying to understand what's really, really important to Australia. Because particularly through the alliance, it's through the three nations, one thing that we need to be very mindful of is making sure that we don't duplicate. So the whole idea is to advance capabilities as quickly as possible to get them into the hands of the warfighter. If we're all doing the same thing at the same time, then I think we're going to defeat one of the true benefits of actually working together. So I think having that sort of coordination at a government-to-government level and then coordinating with industry, so from an industry perspective, we know what's really important and what the priorities are.
And that, before you jump in, Bob, Professor Hilder, that's where ASCA comes in and its role of working together with industry to help stimulate and drive innovation.
Yeah, look, it's a really important topic at the moment, and it was good that you talked about it in the context of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. It's more obvious with Pillar 1 because we have this great industrial project. We know the importance of sovereign capability to each of the AUKUS nations. We know that we have challenges in terms of workforce, challenges in terms of supply chain, and getting after that together is something that's important for all three nations. It's harder to see with Pillar 2, but you have to realise that if we can share something as sensitive as nuclear technology, then we should be able to share other things. So it's a great opportunity to think just beyond what we're doing in Pillar 1. But fundamentally, it then opens up a whole range of opportunities for how we can work together. So you would have seen that from the 1st of September, we have a licence-free export environment across our AUKUS nations. We shouldn't take this for granted. This is something which we've hoped for and worked for decades, and to have that in place now creates incredible opportunity. And I should say that opportunity is not something that I think puts Australia at a disadvantage. We have incredibly innovative companies here that are very attractive to our AUKUS partners, and it creates an easier avenue. But one of the things that ASCA can do in that is help to be part of an integrated ecosystem across our AUKUS nations to make it easier for companies to leverage that. And that's a really important role we have to play. If we're working with companies here in Australia, how can we make it easier for them to access the US and the UK system? I'll give the example of the first AUKUS Innovation Challenge, EW Challenge, and people say, well, it's not very AUKUS. You went out with the same challenge in 3 countries at the same time, and we shared everything. And we started a position where we share that, where in what we're doing, we're able to say, hey, look, we've done this in Australia. Have a look at what that we selected. Look at the talent that you wouldn't have known about otherwise. And that's just, for us, a first step to coming up with a far more harmonised system that then makes it easier to take advantage of those challenges.
Well,
yeah, I'd say is the message getting out, and does the industry understand? Well, I think Defence is doing its best on that front. I know that the last event was in late June from memory, detailed classified and unclassified AUKUS Pillar 2 briefing. I think it became very clear in that process over the last few months that Defence has had to manage these over-programming caps and what that means. So we need to rely on signals coming from Emily and ASCA. We need to rely on what's in the IIP, and I think we need to lean in as far as we can on that front to help understand what the opportunities are for us. And there's no magical solution. There's not a massive pie for us all to eat from, but we need to make sure that we are absolutely attuned to the messages we're hearing, the opportunities in AUKUS. The one thing I suppose, if I could hand back to Emily, is that's good, and I think we're understanding those rules. Those 8 trilateral working groups, Emily, right? They're the ones that are looking at what's happening in each nation and trying to figure out the way ahead. Can you comment on how that ties back into what you bring to the market, how that ties into specific programs? How does industry get signals from those working groups? How does that manifest to opportunities?
Yeah, look, the working groups is one part, and that was a really important part, I should say. So I'll use the AUKUS EW challenge again. The challenge statement we went out with was developed through the EW working group. The EW working group was strongly involved in the whole process all the way through to make sure that was well aligned. From that challenge, we didn't only identify winners for the challenge, but we identified other submissions that were strongly aligned with IIP projects to make sure that we can make those connections and across a broader range of submissions. But the other thing, you mentioned the statement from the Chiefs of Army, and I think this is really important. This is a clear signal of where those priorities are, and something that we're also looking to, not just across the land domain, but of course this is where they've led the way on this, to be able to say, these are our trilateral priorities, these are things we're working after. I'll refer to the AI and autonomy working group, who jumped on that really early, and last year did a joint experimentation campaign in the UK, where they were actually able to share algorithms to transfer control across some international systems, and the industry were involved in that as well. So that's a great example of seeing where those trilateral priorities are and getting after them together.
Professor Hilder, I want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier, and you mentioned that Australia has a number of innovative businesses, many of whom are here today, are attractive to our AUKUS partners. Now, there's a big concern. We know that nationally, in the Australian context, we have a very tight, hot jobs market, similar problems in the US and the UK. How do we make sure, and how does government provide the certainty to Australian businesses to prevent a brain drain when it might be beneficial for them to pack up and go to the US or go to the UK, where they're going to have a greater degree of certainty, of surety over the life of a program, and access to capital, access to equally skilled workforces and experienced workforces?
Look, it's a really good question, and I think it's really important that we facilitate those export opportunities as much as the opportunities here in Australia. So there were two things that you hear, multiple things that you hear us talk about. The Defence Industry Development Strategy speaks to the importance of our private capital and supporting access to that for Australian businesses in a way that I don't think has been part of that clear policy until now, and I think this is really important. We're working really hard to ensure that we have a system that supports dual use, recognising that it's not always a good idea that defence is your only customer, but also making it easier for export opportunities for Australian businesses, which again I point to the export reforms, and then, as I said, making sure that we make it easier for Australian businesses to access that, so that there isn't that incentive. I'm actually incredibly optimistic about what we can do in Australia, but I also appreciate, that we need to, because all of our countries are caught with a shortage in the workforce we need, the challenges of having a sufficient supply chain. We are going to need to work together to get after the challenges that we're facing. And so these are the sort of things that we need to be able to do from government to support.
And Dean, Bob, as business owners, it's obviously in your best interest to make sure that you retain experienced, quality staff in a globalised market for labour. How do you ensure that your keeping, retaining, training, and making sure that your workforce is at the cutting edge of what they need to be doing?
Yeah, well, I don't feel a threat from the UK or the US or anyone else, frankly, in terms of workforce. But I have a strong thing in Acacia around the engagement of our workforce and what that means culturally. And we need to provide a great place to work. We need to provide interesting things for people to do. We need to provide, a supportive environment. And I took over a couple of months ago and, very fairly said people first, right? So if you have that sort of value and that sort of culture, everything else will look after itself. So I don't feel a threat at all. And I don't think we're going to struggle for work to do, in the defence sector. I think there's going to be a lot of jobs. There's going to be a lot of growth that's coming. So run a good company, make sure you look after your people, give them great opportunities and trust them to do what they do, I think there's a pretty simple answer.
Dan? Look, I take a very similar position to Bob, which is at the end of the day, it really comes down to the workforce engagement, making sure you've got the right people, you're actually challenging them as well. And I think there's plenty of challenges there for us. It's about how do you make sure that we can survive the ebbs and flows of, the defence budgeting system, which is, typically up and down and over a long protracted period as well. So from a Nova perspective, our core is test and evaluation. So it's about how do we engage our workforce to make sure that they've got the latest practices, techniques, procedures, etc. Everything is moving into the digital environment. So we've moved a lot of our effort and our time and our education into that environment. So it's about how do we then take that and apply that potentially into AUKUS.
Just moving to a focus on the technology side of Pillar 2. We know that Army is being fundamentally reshaped. We're moving away from Plan Beersheba towards a force focused on littoral manoeuvre and leveraging advanced technologies like autonomous systems and uncrewed systems in particular. We've seen them used to great effect in Ukraine and to a lesser extent in Gaza. Considering those changes and the pace at which those capabilities have been rapidly trialled, developed and then fielded, I read something the other day about some of the Ukrainian autonomous systems are being developed within a matter of days in people's garages, and then from then it's a matter of hours until they're on the battlefield. How do we move at pace and ensure that we are staying ahead of a potential adversary, whether that is an asymmetric threat, because we're seeing a proliferation of those capabilities through asymmetric threat actors, as well as against a peer or near-peer competitor?
Oh, look, so if I can jump in, I guess. So at Acacia Systems, we have three core values. The first one is warfighter first, right? And what that means is what we try to do in an engagement with defence is, hey, we want to talk to the end user, and we have a concept of capability as a service. When I took over a couple of months ago, I try to get to know the people, right? And this young lady, I won't mention her name, she's quite introverted. I said, what do you love about working here? She says, I get Army coming in here every 6 weeks. And she's a software developer, right? And she's doing stuff and she's decoding what those Army people at the working level, not the generals, are saying. And that's really, really powerful, right? It's really, really powerful when someone says, that's what I love working here. So you talked about Ukraine, and what's happening there is days is a bit challenging, but we're here in like a 6-week cycle around tactics, techniques, and procedures, the stuff that Simon Stewart mentioned in the Australian this morning. I add technology to that, right? So if there is a time and a place for the 1,000-line requirement that was developed 5 years ago, the 2-year go-to-market, the 5-year delivery. That's not how you succeed in this environment, right? So we have a focus on agile, and if I think back to the lessons out of Ukraine and whatnot, what that means is you sit with the customer, you find out what's happening and changing in those techniques, tactics, procedures, technology. A lot of it's software driven, and you have an agile framework to deal with that. And I don't care what that is. It could be, I never dealt with a swarm of drones before. I never dealt with one that was going that fast. I never dealt with one that was delivering that capability. But you've got to react to that, and you've got to be able to push stuff back out into the field in a matter of weeks. Otherwise, you'll lose. So I think for me, it's that focus on absolute agility. And I will say that that requires governance oversight from defence. It requires that you knew when you entered a contract with a vendor or a bunch of vendors, you couldn't define what the outcome was going to be. But if you have a governance and an agile process, it doesn't matter. In fact, you don't want to define what you're going to deliver in 18 months. You want to have a process where you can react to what you see, fight what you see, change to what you need to deliver what is actually needed in 18 months' time, not what you thought was going to be needed. So,
yeah, look, I'd say this is absolutely core to what we're trying to achieve in ASCA, and there's not a criticism of what's been done before and the incredible efforts that people have put in, but it's about understanding what's right for the time. And I keep saying that, the model we have now might be right for now, and it may be different in the future, but we have to be prepared to change what we're doing so it's fit for purpose for the times we're living in. So innovation for us is not all about the tech and what we're developing, it's about how we're doing it as well. And I was really pleased when someone told me today that one of the things that they've been most pleased about is what we've done in innovation in process. And we're still we're very early on a journey on this, because it's about how we can do something where, exactly as Bob just said there, we can go from here's an idea to be able to not breach any rules, but to be able to take something and to be able to get into contract with a contract that is fit for purpose, where we're able to manage that along the way, where when the need changes, we're able to work together and address that need rather than relentlessly following something that by the time we bring it into service may already be accounted. That requires a different way of doing things. So rather than sending an email saying, would you like to, can you please respond to these changes? And, we'll give you a month to get back to us. It's a phone call and a conversation, which then allows you to do something the next day. So it's a shift in culture for us. It's thinking about what's the outcome we're after rather than being driven by the process, while being incredibly disciplined about the way we do it so that we do it properly. And so for me, that innovation in process and innovation in the way we do things is equally, if not more important than what we're delivering, because we've never had a problem in being able to deliver innovative solutions and to be able to come up with great ideas. We saw that this morning at the Innovation Awards here in the pictures, but being able to have a process that allows us to bring that into service and to be able to do it as rapidly as possible is where we're putting a lot of the effort.
And Dean, you mentioned earlier that a big part of what Nova Systems does is that test and evaluation piece, which is being identified by government as one of the sovereign defence industry priorities. That only becomes more important as we're accelerating the research, development, acquisition, and then eventual fielding of advanced capabilities, and more important in terms of autonomous and uncrewed systems, given the nature of those platforms where humans might not necessarily be in the loop of a lethal system.
Well, I think again, that sort of, as I said before, the test and evaluation, the earlier you do it, the more, I suppose, you're minimising the risk. As Emily said there, innovation comes around from process. It's not just the technology. So we have to do things quicker and smarter than the way we've done them traditionally. So you can see a lot now moving into the digital space in terms of how we model, in terms of modelling and simulation, how we use AI and machine learning to actually build algorithms, how we feed those algorithms and that data back into the modelling and simulation environment, how we take it back into the field, learn from that, feed that back into the model as well, so we can actually make some decisions as early as possible. So there's an enormous amount of opportunity there in terms of making sure that if we use the technology from a digital perspective and we create the models from the first instance, particularly during experimentation, we can follow that all the way through to sustainment. So we can deliver a capability and we can deliver the correct amount of in-service support that we need to do for that particular capability. But more importantly, we can chop and change throughout the process as well. So whilst I think Bob said it, that most of the systems we're talking about now are largely software driven. So we can chop and change from part A to part B, and we can model the impact of moving from one product to one system to another and look at the total capability outcome. So I think there's some great opportunity for us to actually, through innovation and through speeding up your process, deliver capabilities far more quicker.
It's interesting to note that given the acceleration of certain capabilities, I'm thinking loitering munitions and autonomous systems, the old time frame that you alluded to, Professor Hilder, has seen certain capabilities acquired that, as you mentioned, are out of date or effectively being counted by the time that they enter service en masse. Given the acceleration of rapid prototyping, the proliferation of additive manufacturing and 3D printing, any 15-year-old who's reasonably competent enough with digital design and coding can essentially field quite a complex weapon system with little to no effort. How do we make sure that the average soldier, whether they're in the infantry, they might be in an Apache or any number of the new vehicles that we're rolling out, how do we make sure that those vehicles and those soldiers are safe without breaking the bank trying to counter what might be coming down the track?
Oh, look, without getting into things I can't talk about here, there's an incredible amount of effort that goes into counter technologies, and that is something that we will always focus on, because looking after our people is the most important thing above all else. But at the same time, I think one of the things that allows us to stay out or ahead of the curve is making sure that our soldiers get their hands on new technology as early as possible, that they get the opportunity to use it, to play with it, to be part of that experimentation. It's absolutely critical that we work together with the end user from the start. This has become something that we've learned from our US colleagues, that they bring them in very, very early on. This is part of what is making some of the programs so successful, where they're able to then accelerate, because this is critically important in terms of us understanding where we're going and what we're doing, and staying at the edge. And so for us, that's an essential part of it that we're doing. We have a stronger focus on that genuine experimentation and making sure that we can get that in the hands of the warfighter as early as possible and as safely as possible. The other thing that I would say in terms of this is that we have to be always cognizant of what is acceptable to society and the social license we have to use some of these technologies. There are certain things that we won't use or we won't be developing around, and I think that is really important, that we respect the social license we have to do these things and what we need to do that, and that does make it challenging at times when we're thinking about the options available to us.
Does that leave us at a disadvantage though? Because adversaries that we might face may not necessarily have the same moral issues with those sorts of technologies.
We can make that argument, but my personal view, and this is certainly coming from that standpoint, is that if we are breaking those moral rules and those if we're stepping outside our moral framework, then what are we? We're taking a step that is beyond what we're actually fighting for, in my mind. So I think it's really important that we understand what that moral framework is, what are the lines that we don't cross, because ultimately it is that we're all here to protect. And so, yeah, and there are other ways to generate asymmetry that don't require playing dirty.
Well, I think there's a time and place as well. So a story that's quite moving to me is true story, Ukraine. There's this young soldier. He reports 4 bogeys inbound drones. He tells his commander he's engaging them. His system missed one, and his mates died. Right, a bunch of friends died. And the article kind of finishes saying 3 more bogeys inbound. That's chilling to me, right? But in that example, then I see more freedom in prosecuting that threat. There's not a lot of problem in my mind. I know that if it's in the air and it's coming this way, I'll prosecute it. I'm not prosecuting a human. I'm prosecuting a threat. Those are the sorts of things we should get after hard to give that guy in the field optionality, right? If I'm near an airport, I'll be careful. Could be a bird, could be whatever. If I'm out there and getting shot at, in theatre from that direction, then I see we should be exploring much less human in the loop, maybe a lot more human on the loop in countering those threats. Because if we don't, that same story I mentioned, there's going to be more examples of it. And we owe the mums and dads, wives, sweethearts and whatnot more than not being brave enough to tackle that stuff, I think.
Mm-hmm. And Professor Hilder, you mentioned that you've learned the lesson, or Defence rather has learned the lesson to engage early with the warfighter. Learning that from the United States, that's a big step forward. One of the other things that they do quite successfully in the US is the early engagement of industry, working with industry, bringing them into the room in a classified or an unclassified environment to provide them with the threat assessments and the details of a potential adversary's capability. Part of the criticism of previous defence innovation ecosystems has been that there wasn't always that ability to reach into industry and tap somebody on the shoulder and say, we know you developed something that could be of use here. We want you to come in and have a conversation with us. From the industry point of view, we're starting to see that change a little bit. But do you think we're moving fast enough? Dean and Bob, and then Professor Hilder, you can have the final say on that one.
Well, I think communications is key. At the end of the day, if you don't know what you don't know, you can't assist. So we do need to understand the problem space. There needs to be some method or some way that we can interact and share the problem set. And I think, without stealing in any of Emily's thunder, we're seeing that now with some of the innovation calls, but that's only just started to happen. So I agree with what you said before, which is that we have been slow to engage, and we're not as good as maybe some of our other nations, our partners there. Having come recently back from the UK, they engaged industry very, very early. In fact, it's almost as soon as AUKUS was announced, there were workshops with defence industry, because it was really about going out and understanding, okay, what do we have in our own backyard? What can we use, and what do we need to develop? Where are our deficiencies or gaps? And I think that is, since I've been back in Australia the last 6 months, that's starting to take place, as Bob said, with the briefings now. So Defence is engaging, ASCA is engaging as well with calls. But of course, you can always say there's got to be more of it, and there does. But it's about really, truly understanding what is the problem set, and then how can we assist. And then actually, because you might just stumble across a particular technology from another domain, and you would never ever think of applying it in a defence sector. But there's a lot out there, and there's a lot that we can do and a lot we can share as well. And sorry, just before I hand over to Bob, I think an example of that is really in the undersea capabilities. So oil and gas have been working at 3,000 metres, below the surface, going along, fixing cables, surveilling. They have permanent residency of underwater robotics. They've done a lot there. So I think that's one area when we talk about undersea, we should be tapping straight into oil and gas and say, give us all the lessons learned and what can we learn from that and apply that in defence.
And that comes back to your point, Professor Hilder, about dual-use technology. There's a lot, particularly in the realm of autonomy, across mining and resources as well as agriculture in Australia, that we punch very well above our weight. And to steal a phrase from the Prime Minister, we are a autonomous systems superpower.
Yeah, look, I've been in defence just under 4 years, and wasn't strongly engaged with the defence sector at all before that. I just saw the opportunity from other sectors I work with, particularly mining and resources, where you could see these opportunities. And I think that's one of the things, that's certainly a learning that we brought into ASCA, that we need to make it easier for those that haven't traditionally engaged with the defence sector to engage, and that includes bringing them in early, providing that context, doing whatever we can in an unclassified environment to be able to do that, because we're missing opportunity otherwise. And we know that in a lot of cases the commercial sector is leading what we're doing in defence, and we really want to be able to capture that wherever we can. It's why we're working really closely with our friends at the Defence Innovation Unit in the US, because they're a number of years ahead of us in terms of trying to harness this greater capability. And so the more we can do that and the more we can learn, we will. I think the other thing that we did some pretty extensive consultation before the ASCA model was framed up and that was ultimately approved by government. And part of that was understanding what was important. We got two really clear messages. I've said there's a number of things. The second best answer to yes is a really quick no. And we need to know your problems so we can respond. So it's a real focus for us. We'll say that co-design is core to everything that we do in ASCA, and co-design involves the military, our S&T experts and industry, and we do that in an open environment so that we can all learn. And it's great when people, someone said to me, I've learned more in the last 4 weeks than I did in 5 years of working with another part of defence previously. So that tells me we're getting something right in the change in approach, but it really is the only way to do it. You need to have a common understanding, you need to understand the different pressures you have and the challenges you have, because ultimately we've got to deliver this together. It's a journey, and we'll continue walking down that path, but it is something that I and the team in ASCA are really committed to, because it's the only way we're going to deliver things quickly.
Well, yeah, I think if I reflect on what's maybe changed in relation to the question, what we need to be good at, I think what's changed, and I've been to all of the recent briefings, right, the classified and unclassified, it's been made very, very clear that her door's open, right, that all the sponsors' doors are open, that if we have something relevant in terms of a conversation, maybe years ago would have been, no need to know. If you've got a clearance and something worthy of conversation, Defence will bring you into that classified briefing. So I think we need to realise that barrier's gone, right, essentially. And then you think about what do we need to be good at? Well, we need to lean in to ASCA. We need to lean into the sponsors. We need to lean in to our contacts as industry and understand what's in the IIP, understand what those working groups in AUKUS Pillar II do, and say, I've got something to offer here, right? We actually need to shape that conversation. Absolutely. And then, so that's what we need to do. And I think what we're good at, let's not lose sight of it, is the US is probably more like, the sorts of things that change my world as an SME if you drop an ocean in terms of the US funding R&D, right? So a lot of money in the US, big opportunities. In the UK, probably a lot more patronage, like we'll look after you, In Australia, we've had to, if you're a successful SME in Australia, you've had to navigate that ecosystem of limited funding, of creating those arguments with defence. And I think that makes us more agile, and we shouldn't forget that. So I think that's what we need to double down on. You need to double down on what you're good at. You need to bring those conversations into ASCA and into your sponsors, right? And then you need to trust that you're good and agile. And those are the sorts of things that Emily and the AUKUS folks will take into the US and the UK. Here we've got a couple of exemplars. I think those are great opportunities for us.
And we have seen recently, in recent weeks actually, the announcement around Ghost Shark, and that's one of the great disruptive capabilities that is being developed in collaboration between ASCA and Europe. How do we repeat that success? Now, obviously, not every example is going to be the same, but there's got to be some base recipe for which we can emulate time and time again to make sure that we get it right.
Yeah, look, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach, and you'll see that in the fact that we are running different programs in ASCA that recognises that. But one of the things that I think is really important and that we're working very hard on is that when we go out with a call and when we work through that initial value for money assessment and who we're working with, that we have something that allows us to take us, if Christina was here, he'd talk about it from that innovation, that early development through what we need to do around production, through sustainment, through to export. Something that means that when you come in the door and you know that if you hit the milestones, that there is that acquisition opportunity, that we don't have to go out and recompete on something where, you may have shared substantial risk at the front end, but also that then says to investors, this is something worth investing in because there's a genuine opportunity in that. And I think that's really important, because the more that we can provide ways to make our business more attractive to investment, to be able to support that, to be able to put out the demand signals that says this is something here where we are committed to pulling it through. And you may have heard Minister Conroy say that for an ASCA mission to start, the capability manager's feet need to be nailed to the floor. And what that is about a genuine commitment that it is viable and it will be pulled through to capability, that we will align things with what we have in the IIP, that we're committed to bringing through that capability because we need it, and providing that different type of uncertainty. Doesn't mean it's without risk, but it means you're taking a risk, understanding what the end point could be. And that is really important from my perspective, because it changes a calculus in terms of investment early on.
Dean, you look like you had something to add there.
No. I was just, again, I feel like the third speaker on a debate. I just tend to agree with everything, but we'll sum up. But no, totally agree with what Emily said.
Professor Hilder, we heard Bob said that you've repeatedly said that your door is open, and I know Chris Deeble, same situation. I don't know quite what the circumstances are with the heads of capability, but they're all pretty reasonable people and very skilled at what they do. From your perspective, what do you want to see from industry? How far forward do you want to see industry leaning?
Yeah, look, my door's open. I know that Chris says the same, and that I think that they've got fabulous colleagues in the services as well. I guess the bit I would say is to understand that part of the reason that we don't have an open portal for unsolicited proposals is not because we don't think there are good ideas out there. It's that our capacity to be able to work through those is limited. So I'm sure I disappoint some people when I say that's great, but can you wait till we put out a call and respond to that? And part of that is actually managing expectations. We don't want you putting huge amounts of effort into something that we then don't have the capacity to accept. You'll see that particularly those that might have been to briefings around the new IIP and other things will see we're getting after some really clear priorities, because that's what we need to do, that's what we need to focus on. We're being really straight with you about what those priorities are and where we're putting our effort. It doesn't mean that what you're doing is not good, but it does mean that we're going to have to go after priorities in order, just based on the sheer capacity we have to do that. And that's going to continue to be a challenge, but it's really important for us. Prioritisation is probably everyone's favourite word around defence at the moment. So please engage through our calls. Please engage through our activities. That doesn't mean that the door is completely closed. We've got 24 people pitching at our first ASCA pitch day next week as part of the AdStar conference. That was an opportunity to say what's out there. We went out with a very broad, innovative, asymmetric technology, to be able to learn about the things that we don't know. And so we'll continue doing that, but be gentle with us while we're doing that. The demand is there and it's fabulous, but that's why we're trying to have a lot of these fora and opportunities for industry to engage without it turning into feeling like a closed door just because we don't have the capacity one-on-one all the time.
Yeah. Bob, as an SME, one of the problems that I hear quite frequently from SMEs is that the language in which documents like DSR, NDS, IIP are written is intentionally vague in some ways. I don't think that one's a surprise for anybody. But for small or medium businesses that don't have the workforce to be able to sit down, go through line by line, point by point, priority by priority, how do you make sure that you're getting after, or how does an SME make sure that what you're getting after is actually what's represented by the government's intent, stated intent?
So I think any company out there, we know what we're good at, right? Anyone out there knows, this is my differentiator. This is what I'm good at. I kind of think it's okay, because I don't, until you put that 1,000-line requirement out, I got license and latitude, right? Back to the issue. We need to get this good stuff that we know that we can do. There's undersea surveillance, right? And there's EW, and there's areas that lend themselves to SMEs saying, this is what I'm really good at, and I decode this way. This is what I think. Emily doesn't have all the answers, right? The capability managers don't have all the answers. They're not all sitting on those 1,000 lines of requirements, say, I picked that one. So our job as SMEs is to do a good job at understanding what you're good at. I think there's enough signals in the IIP. There's enough signals in the programs of record. There's probably enough subtle signals in the construct of those trilateral working groups for us to start leading in. So I don't think it's a problem of capacity, Steve. I think it's you got to learn how to play in this environment. And I think, we've all got contacts, and our good friends in defence, in capability sponsor land, they don't have all the answers either. Our job is to try to give them some that make sense. Maybe a bit selfishly, but if you've got a strong message and a strong product or a strong idea and a strong capability, you've got to make sure these folks know about it.
And Dean, from a business that covers the range of capability areas that defence focuses on, how does Nova get after that and make sure that it's focusing its effort, its resources, its manpower to make sure that you're getting the bang for buck that your business requires?
I think a lot of it comes down to actually having that discussion with the customer, in particular, from our side with CASG, to understand what the real needs are. I'm not trying to be negative here, but I don't think there is enough clarification there. I can see broad areas, but it's very, very difficult to hang your hat on a particular. So we don't know what the projects are yet, and I know that's still forming.
Sorry, not clarification from CASG or the IIP or the NDS.
One flows into the other. So we've got the NDS, and where that flows through into the DSR, then you've got the DSR flowing into the IIP. We understand generally or broadly the areas, but they actually, if you're actually trying to hang your hat on something and put something in your forward order book to understand what's coming, that is quite difficult because there has been some delay. But that's just around, dare I say, the funding issues that we've had, because a lot of the money at the moment is going into AUKUS Pillar 1. A lot of it is going to maritime. We understand that in terms of the timelines. But I think defence are now coming around. So the capability managers are now starting to understand what's left in their budget, and then what can they now, in terms of which projects can they put together, what's their priorities, and then that engagement is taking place then through CASG. So I think it's just a timing issue. And I know that a lot of the SMEs that we work with, they talk about making sure that, if they're going to survive, they need deep pockets and they need a lot of patience. But I think that's starting to come through. If you've been able to survive to this point, and if you still have the inclination to work in the industry and to sell into defence, then things will start to brighten up. I think we're coming out of the bottom, and we're actually starting to see some opportunity there now. So I think it's good to be in defence now as compared to the last couple of years, I think.
Interesting. And that brings us to the final question for today. And we might start with Dean and then work our way back to Bob. How will we define success for Pillar 2?
Probably two things. I think avoiding duplication, as I said at the beginning, making sure that we're not producing the same as our partners. And I think the other one is acceptance of that, either that product, that system, that capability is accepted by our partners in the US and the UK. I think that's a good measure of success, that it's not only being used here in Australia, it's also being used by our partners as well.
No more orphan systems.
Sorry?
No more orphan platforms.
Indeed.
Professor Hilder.
Now I get to say I agree with Dean. And I do, but the other thing I would add to that, and it seems less cool and sexy, but for me a big part of the success of Pillar 2 is get to a point where we have free information sharing between the three countries, where we can share things at all different levels of classification with the right systems and be able to some extent to operate as one common system. Seems simple, seems kind of uninteresting, but it's the bit that would unlock so much more. So for me, there's been an immense amount of effort that's gone into that. It might not look like any actual capability, but it's the underpinning piece that will allow us to do that. And as part of that, I'm really keen to see how we better harmonise our innovation systems and take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think how we would define success, certainly one angle on that for me is that firstly, we've done something of use, right, that we can peg to Pillar 2. And we're not far away, but it is quite early in terms of creating and delivering solutions, right? But I think then the onus falls back to the lady on my left and her colleagues to say, right, we've done this good thing here, and I would see an element of success in taking an Australian company solution or partnership solution, or, and offering it in the US and the UK with advocacy, right? Doesn't mean you're going to get it there, but we should, back to Dean's point, I think, you get in a world there where you stop doubling and tripling up on stuff. So if there's early signals of success, early advocacy from Emily and the folks that work in that whole Pillar 2 environment, hey, we're a winner here. I would see success as the US and the UK leaning back a little bit and saying, we'll support that because we can see the use for us. And you said my last job is actually the first cooperative program we did with the US Navy. There's models there where you can make that stuff work, right? There's precedent all over the place. So I think success is when we can proudly say, here's a couple of AUKUS Pillar things, 2 things we've done in Australia that are getting legs in the US and UK. That would be good.
Dean, Professor Hilder, Bob, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panel guests today. Thank you. And please join us for networking and drinks at the Defence SA stand now. Thank you very much.